is recognizing that our welcoming time of this arrival, which, by the way, Advent also means ripening. It also means invasion, to invade. So this cataclysmic or amazing birth thing that's taking place is so because it's taking place in us. It's like we're in gestation right now. We're getting ready. So the birth time is coming. And so the joy is increasing as the time gets closer. And we can feel ourselves, if we allow it, that the door of our heart is unlocking and getting ready to be flung open. So I'm going to invite you to repeat this after me. Today I welcome joy into my mind and heart. I don't need a reason to choose contentment. No circumstance or condition can stop me from choosing it. The divine intelligence of spirit is never confused. Never lacking or indifferent. One with God is always a majority. I align with my highest values and choose joy. This is what Ernest Holmes said about joy. Ernest Holmes is our founder. There is a stream of life running into every organ and function of your being. This stream is always there. It never stops, not for a second. If it did, the universe would cease to exist. Inexhaustible energy exists at the center of your being. Therefore, learn to live without effort. Activity is the joy of life flowing through you. And then, in How to Use the Science of Mind, he wrote this: there should be a sense of joy in this work, meaning in our prayer work, in our life. A feeling of enthusiasm as well as of conviction. A warm mental expectancy backed by a deep intellectual conviction and an even deeper spiritual awareness. So that's kind of what we're going for, actually. And so we're going to sing our Advent song now that was written by Bodie and Reverend Carol. Some of you know this. It has 3 little verses, 1 for each candle so far.
We light a candle in the dark to greet the newborn sun. The earth turns upon its axis, a new year is begun. A new year is begun. We light 2 candles in the dark to greet the newborn sun. The loss of reaching to the light, winter's hold is done. Winter's hold is done. We light 3 candles in the dark to greet the newborn son. Furry beings out from hiding, sleep will soon be done. Sleep will soon be done. Sleep will soon be done.
Yes. So now, as we get closer to the time, we also have this guy. You see, we have a large visual aid up here. We have this guy. And it is amazing the number of different names the winter gift bringer has in different countries all over the world for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. But before I talk about him, I have to share some Christmas humor with you. After her 90th birthday, this woman writes, My friend Marie found that shopping for Christmas gifts had become too difficult. So she decided to send checks to everyone on her Christmas list instead. And on each card, she wrote, "Buy your own present." And she mailed them early. And then she had her usual flurry of family festivities. And after Christmas, she got around to clearing off her cluttered desk. And underneath a stack of papers, she found all the gift checks. She had not enclosed them, which meant that all her friends and family got a Christmas card that said, "Buy your own present." And that's not all. You know how we don't do as many Christmas card writing things these days. Now we do a lot more things by email and stuff like that. But I can remember writing dozens of Christmas cards to people, a little note in each one, signing them, then addressing all the envelopes, licking all the stamps, having my mouth basically glued shut for the rest of the season. So this happened during this period of time. Another woman says, "My friend Shirley had written her last Christmas card and wearily moved on to writing checks for the phone company, the electric company, the department stores. And after the holidays, the extent of her pre-Christmas exhaustion became apparent when the bank returned one of her checks with an incorrect signature notation. She had signed it, Shirley, Bernie, and the girls." So the season can get a little bit harrowing. We can get a little nervous or overcome or just plain tired with everything that's going on. And yet, the perennial winter gift bringer still lights up the skies and lights up our hearts and lights up the stories. And so this fellow, he didn't always look like this. He's looked a lot of different ways, and he's had a lot of different names. St. Nicholas, St. Nick, Kris Kringle, Father Christmas, Father Frost, Pelsnickel. He's had all these different names. And two of his names, St. Nicholas and Santa Claus, come from the Dutch who settled in New York because they believed that St. Nicholas was the one that brought the gifts and gave them to the children. His feast is the 6th of December. And he was born in Turkey. He lived in the 3rd century and the beginning of the 4th century. And he was reputed to have created miracles and been the patron saint of many different groups, and particularly of children. And so it was considered that the gifts were brought for his festival on December 6th. And because the Dutch said St. Nicholas very fast, it sounded like Santa Claus. Santa Claus. And so when the English said it, it became Santa Claus. And that's how St. Nicholas became St. Nick. He was apparently, at the time he lived, a defiant defender of the church doctrine during a time when there was a lot of persecution of Christians, and even the priests were called upon to renounce all their beliefs on pain of death. And so he had been imprisoned for quite a while. But much later, like 1,000 years after he lived, from like 1200 to 1500, he was the magical gift bringer. And he was sort of starting to be modeled in people's minds, a la Odin, the Norse god, and Saturn, the Roman god, who were white-bearded gods with magical powers and could fly. And not only did he bring gifts, he also ensured that children prayed and behaved well. And so this was his role. But he fell out of favor during the Reformation. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But then we also have in the Orthodox traditions an equivalent of St. Nicholas, which is St. Basil. And he was also Turkish. He lived a little bit later than Nicholas, and he became the bringer of gifts to the children in those lands on January 1st, which is his feast day, because he was reputed to have given his wealth to the poor and the needy and the underprivileged and children. And the great cathedral that we see pictures of that's so amazing in Red Square in Moscow is St. Basil's Cathedral. And it's right near the Kremlin. So he was the one. And both of these guys, St. Nicholas and St. Basil, are part of the religious old man tradition. So there's this overlapping of winter-based sort of civil traditions and religious-based old man traditions. And so St. Nicholas, St. Basil, Santa Claus, Father Christmas later in England, Père Noël in France, Sinterklaas, they were all part of that tradition. And then, during the Reformation, Martin Luther wasn't thinking that was such a great idea. He was thinking that the attention should really be on the Christ child, or Christkindl, as he was referred to in Germany, which of course became Christkringle. So the Christkindl, the Christ child, was supposed to be the bringer of gifts, and it was moved to Christmas Eve. The problem with that was an infant can't carry a lot of things. And also, it seemed unseemly for the Christ child to discipline other children around their behavior. So he began to have, in the traditions, this big, furry, kind of scary partner who traveled with him, carried all the gifts, and made sure the kids behaved. And this guy was really scary with all his different names, because either they got a whipping or they got kidnapped. Those were the threats if this fellow discovered that they were not behaving properly. And so he was, one of his names was Pelsnickel, which means furry Nicholas. So he kind of was like St. Nicholas, but he was definitely in furs and big. And he went with the Christ child. So that Christ child tradition, and sometimes the baby was not exactly baby Jesus, he was an angel with a helper. And those gifts, when it was the angel with a helper, were given on Christmas Eve also. Then, in a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, there is a three kings tradition, where the three kings bring the gifts, and they bring them on Epiphany, which is January 6th, when they were supposed to have finally arrived at the stable. And they bring gifts to children the night before the Epiphany. And they come in answer to letters the children send them, and they come on camels, all in one night, and children leave out food and drink for the kings and the camels, who only eat once a year. So those are in the Spanish-speaking countries. So we have this fellow who eventually started to look like that. And I want to tell you a little bit about how that developed. So in early America, Christmas wasn't like our holiday now. It was kind of a drunken mess, really. It was like Saturnalia, like an outdoor, alcohol-fueled, rowdy community blowout. And that's what it had become in England also. So in the early decades of the 19th century, that changed because of a series of poets and writers who were trying to make Christmas into more of a family tradition and celebration again by reviving and kind of re-infusing St. Nicholas. And so Washington Irving wrote a book in 1809, Knickerbocker's History of New York, and he portrayed Nicholas as this pipe-smoking, soaring over the rooftops in a flying wagon, delivering presents to good girls and boys, and switches. Sometimes it's coal, sometimes it's switches, to naughty ones. Cece, you might want to change your sweater about now, because it says naughty today. And then in 1821, there was an anonymous illustrated poem where you finally see Santa Claus dressed in the furs of Pelsnickel and some of those shaggy Germanic big guys. And he brought gifts to good girls and boys, or a birch rod. And then in 1822, Clement Clarke Moore wrote what we now call The Night Before Christmas, that poem. And he wrote it for his 6 children, with no intention of adding it to the Santa Claus phenomenon that was occurring, but it got published anonymously the next year, and it went viral, as we would say now. However, in the 19th century, Santa Claus was still showing up in different colors of clothing. He was different sizes, from miniature to massive. a lot of different guises. And then Thomas Nast, who was a political cartoonist in that era, he created this jolly, chubby, grandfatherly face. And behold, inflatable Santa. And so then he kind of underwent a reverse migration back to Europe, where in England he became Father Christmas, in France, Père Noël, and so on and so on. And the interesting thing is that during the time of Stalin, Santa Claus was in disrepute as far as Stalin was concerned. He was trying to do away with all of the celebration of Christmas and gift bringers, but that didn't go over very well with the people. So in the 1930s, when he needed to build support, he kind of allowed for a reemergence of Grandfather Frost, not as a Christmas gift bringer, but as a New Year's gift bringer. However, he never was actually able to replace people's native gift bringer, whatever they called that person, whatever he was, whatever his nature was. It just continued to operate that way. And it just says to me something about, there is something about the wintertime when we go into the darkness, I mean really into the darkness in the northern hemisphere in the wintertime here, at this time of year, where people yearn for an expression of light and hopefulness and warmth and safety and plenty. And particularly the generosity of spirit and the celebration of the spring returning and the welcoming of that warmth and light personified in saints and gift bringers in all these countries. And so, although not all of them have been religious figures, some are entirely local. They all now tend to be focused on their particular holidays, once again, no matter what. And so we have a time of year where we're invited into kind of a mystery. And the mystery, whatever your tradition is, whatever your country is, whatever your gift bringer is, the mystery is the unexplainable phenomenon of a gift bringer traveling through the world in one night and bringing gifts to little children, and the delight of that experience, that preparation, that livingness. And by the way, as a side note, the bones, in the Catholic tradition, there are reliquaries in the tabernacle at every church, which are supposed to contain relics of actual saints, which means like bones, stuff like that. Now, we would have had to have a million gazillion more saints than we actually ever had to have somebody's bone in every single cathedral and church, but that's beside the point. So St. Nicholas's bones were believed to have been stolen and moved somewhere else and, identified as his. How, I don't know. And because people believe that was St. Nicholas, relatively recently, in this last 50 years or so, this woman who does this kind of forensic modeling got pictures of this skull, and she created an image of what St. Nicholas might have looked like, what his face might have looked like. This Greek man who served in Turkey, or was Turkish, whatever it was, but that Middle Eastern, olive-skinned, dark-eyed, gray-haired gentleman. And so the question is that really what he looked like? Well, in some images, in some icons, the icon I used earlier, he was quite bright. But in some icons, the ridges on his forehead are very deep and his skin is much darker. So in looking at that, the question became, is that really what he looked like? Or maybe, was he actually a Klingon? No. Just a side note, because this is the morning of joy. You got to have something, So he does look like a Klingon, doesn't he? So the question that I want to ask us this morning is, what are the gift bringer qualities that want to be carried forward by us? What are those gift bringer qualities? You know, in an earlier slide, I said that if you took the combined characteristics of all of the gift bringers, whatever their names were, this one who brings the gifts, his qualities are protector, healer, patron saint, gift bringer, behavior monitor, and assistant to baby Jesus. Those are kind of his grouped characteristics. So the question then to us is, what of those characteristics does our family or our friends or our world need that might be being called forth from us? Because it isn't just about, let's hear stories about the nativity. Let's hear stories about baby Jesus and the escape to Egypt. Let's hear stories about Santa Claus. Let's hear stories, but you know, if we just hear the stories and, oh yeah, that's familiar, there is no birth taking place in us. It was Meister Eckhart who said something about, you know, what does it matter to me if Mary's full of grace if I am not also full of grace? What does it matter if she brings forth this divine child if I do not also bring forth a divine child in my own time, in my own life, in my own world? And so if we look at Santa Claus as actually a figure in a spiritual tradition that is as old and older than the Christmas tradition, a tradition of winter gift bringer that has been around maybe as long as people have been around, and we say, well, what part of that winter gift bringer also wants to be born in me? You know, what or who is it in my world that needs to be protected? Who is it that needs healing or mentoring or gifts? Or who might it be who needs the guidance of boundaries, and that I'm actually called to bring healing or mentoring or boundaries or gifts or protection? What am I called to live as and to be in my own world right now? So I think that's a reasonable question for us to ask ourselves. And in 1897, this little girl asked her father a question. And he said to her, well, why don't you ask that question, write your question down and send it to the Sun, the New York Sun, the newspaper. Because if you see it in the Sun, it's so. And so this got printed in the New York Sun in 1897. We take pleasure in answering at once and thus prominently the communication below, expressing at the same time our great gratification that its faithful author is numbered among the friends of the Sun. And here's her letter. Dear editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the Sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Signed, Virginia O'Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street. And this is the response. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant. In his intellect, as compared with the boundless world about him, as measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist. And you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance, to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus, you might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus, but even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not. But that's no proof that they are not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are, unseen and unseeable, in this world. You may tear apart the baby's rattle and see what makes the noise inside, but there is a veil covering the unseen world, which not the strongest man, nor even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived could tear apart. Only faith, fancy, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view and picture the supernal beauty and glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, in all this world, there is nothing else real and abiding. No Santa Claus. Thank God he lives, and he lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. And so now, all these many years later, 100 and more years since that article was written, Santa Claus still graces the heart every year. St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, Kris Kringle, whatever you might call the presence of mystery, wonder, gift-bringing, healing, and protection. So let us evoke that presence in this place, in our homes, in our hearts, in our lives. And let's bring it forth this Christmas, this solstice, this Hanukkah. Let's bring it forth into this season of light, because that mystery is what we are all made of. Namaste. Now,